Live in Rome on the eve of the funeral of Pope Francis, with hundreds of thousands of people expected to attend. This evening, the last of the crowds filed past Pope Francis in St. Peter's Basilica to pay their respects before its doors were closed to the public. Among them, France's President Macron, one of many world leaders in Rome for the funeral. Sir Keir Starmer is also here. He was welcomed by Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. And you can see Air Force One with President Trump on board, just arriving at Rome Airport now. His predecessor, Joe Biden, will also be attending. A calmness has descended now on St. Peter's Square ahead of tomorrow's funeral, when millions across the world will be remembering and honouring Pope Francis.
And also on the programme, 3 hours of...
Good evening from the Vatican. Here, just behind me in St. Peter's Square, it's a scene of calmness and serenity. But tomorrow morning, it will be transformed for the funeral of Pope Francis. There'll be hundreds of thousands of people in the square and in the surrounding areas. And security here has been stepped up as world leaders begin to arrive ahead of the service. 250,000 people have been inside St. Peter's Basilica to pay their respects to Pope Francis while he was lying in state. In a moment, we'll bring you details of the order of events for tomorrow and the views of people, both British and Italian, who are here for this solemn occasion. But first, here's our religion editor, Aleem Makboul.
This was the final chance to say a personal goodbye. The Macrons among those who managed to pay their respects beside the body of the Pope shortly before the doors of St. Peter's Basilica were shut. Many other world leaders have been arriving for tomorrow's funeral. Sir Keir Starmer, welcomed by Italy's Giorgia Meloni. We were invited into the Vatican to meet someone who knew the Pope well and travelled with him for more than 10 years, his foreign minister, Archbishop Paul Gallagher. He told us what he thought drove the Pope.
He was very aware that we live in a world which the vast majority of people are powerless, that they do not have their destiny in their hands. And I think he felt that he could contribute something to that and help make things better, a little bit better for them.
But he says the Pope was often very strong-willed, sometimes defying advice.
One thing I always admired about him was that he didn't run away from difficult things. I think he was always, willing to surprise us with who he is willing to meet and who he's willing to talk to.
He particularly remembers a trip to the Central African Republic at a difficult time when everyone had told the Pope it was too dangerous to go.
People were expressing reservations and that. And he just sort of said, well, I'm going, if nobody wants to come, fine. I'll go on my own, which of course was rather putting us to shame.
His last trip was to a prison in Rome. Some inmates are invited guests at the Pope's funeral. After the funeral, the body of Pope Francis will be brought here for burial inside the Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore, and we're expecting thousands of people to line the 20-minute route to get here. And then the Vatican says he'll be welcomed for the final time on the steps of the Basilica by a group of what it describes as the poor and needy. His trip to Asia last autumn was the longest ever undertaken by any pope, so why didn't he slow down, even in poor health?
Somebody had said to him something like, why don't you take it easier and this sort of thing. And he said, no, towards the end, you have to push more. And he undoubtedly wanted to, die with his boots on. There's no doubt about that.
Tonight, in a ceremony behind closed doors, the Pope's coffin was shut and sealed, ready for his final farewell in the morning. Aleem Makboul, BBC News at the Vatican.
The funeral of Pope Francis will be simpler than those of previous popes, following his own wishes for a less elaborate ceremony. This is how tomorrow will unfold. Pope Francis has been lying in state since Wednesday inside St. Peter's Basilica in the heart of the Vatican. The service will take place at 9 a.m. UK time. That's 10 a.m. here in Rome, in front of St. Peter's Basilica. At least 170 heads of state or government will be attending. After a concluding prayer formally entrusting the Pope to God, a procession will take place to move the pontiff's body to be buried at St. Mary Major Basilica, which sits outside the Vatican walls in the centre of Rome. The burial will take place in the evening. Pope Francis asked for his tomb to be in the ground, for it to be simple and to bear only the inscription Franciscus, the Latin version of his chosen name. In the weeks that follow, the process of selecting a new pope, known as the conclave, will then take place. Well, ahead of tomorrow's funeral, there are many world leaders who have been coming into Rome, and we can see now the pictures of President Donald Trump, accompanied by his wife Melania, just arriving here in Rome to take part, to attend this funeral tomorrow, coming down the steps of Air Force One as we're watching them. And an interesting fact that his predecessor, President Joe Biden, will also be attending tomorrow's funeral. Well as the world leaders, there are also many other people, members of the public, who are here in Rome for tomorrow's funeral. And I've been talking to Britons and to Italians about what it means to them to be here. Rhythmics Goa, who hail from Swindon, had their concert in Rome cancelled when Pope Francis died. But they decided to perform anyway.
The Pope was the reason that we're here in the first place. So we've been practicing really hard to show our dedication, and we're here to pay our respects.
What do you hope the church might become?
I hope that teenagers find peace and find God, and so we can all grow closer to God.
It's important that we all acknowledge how much Pope Francis has done to us. Even after his death, I'm sure you keep inspiring people.
Rome is packed with people, many pilgrims, many tourists, and many with Pope Francis on their minds. You've got the same name as him.
Indeed, yes. It meant a lot to me. I had a huge emotional connection to him, yes, with the Pope. And it just built my future, I guess. I want to follow his example, helping people and helping poor people and people I need, I guess.
More music, but this time in prayer. We're now near St. Peter's, which is where I meet an 11-strong group visiting from Llanelli.
So I say we're coming through, I said, oh my God, the emotion really grips you, and the passion, and it's eerie almost. You're walking down here now, and
not one of us is a Catholic, but we really feel
such a special man. It's just overwhelming. It's just an honor and a privilege to be here. It really is, from the bottom of my heart. It's just overwhelming. I just can't believe we're here.
A period of reflection and emotion for believers and non-believers alike. Let's get a final word from Aleem Maqbool. Aleem, this whole week has been a chance for ordinary people to pay their respects.
Yes, it's sort of been bookended by people's involvement. We've had the last couple of days where people could file past the coffin, and as we know, they came in their droves to do that. The coffin has now been sealed, and tomorrow this beautiful square will become the world's most spectacular stage. You know, you'll have reigning monarchs, you'll have heads of state on that side, on the left you'll have religious leaders, you'll have all the cardinals. But in life, Pope Francis was never really about the great and the good. If you followed him around the world, if you went on trips like I did, sometimes during the diplomatic events there were times where he never really looked particularly happy. He got his energy through being around people. That's what he loved doing throughout his papacy. And interesting that he, unlike other popes, is not going to be buried in the crypt here. His body is going to be taken after the Mass to a different place where people will line the route, and they will get the chance, after all the great and the good, to say their goodbye. So yes, it will be an incredible, spectacular ceremony here, but thanks to the instructions that he left behind, we will have something of the character of the man that the world will be saying farewell to tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Aleem Maqbool, our religion editor there. And of course, the funeral of Pope Francis tomorrow will be covered across the BBC, here on BBC One and on iPlayer. I'll be with you from 8:30 in the morning. But for now, it's back to you, Jane.
Rita.